Listen, I need you to understand something before we start this tale, because what I'm about to tell you will sound absolutely insane. My name is Thraxic. I used to be a tactical analyst for the Vracan Dominion before everything went spectacularly wrong in a way that still keeps me awake during our sleep cycles. You want to know the exact moment my entire species realized we'd made a catastrophic species-defining error? It wasn't during the first engagement. It wasn't when our border fortresses started reporting impossible breaches.
No.
It was 3 months before we even officially declared hostilities, when an old, half-retired archivist named Vorlin stood before the High War Council and said 7 words that absolutely nobody took seriously. If you push them, they will redefine the game. We laughed. Oh, we laughed so hard. Vorlin was ancient, his carapace dull with age, his antennae drooping. He spent his days cataloging dead civilizations, not analyzing living threats. What could he possibly know? Everything, as it turned out. Absolutely everything. Let me back up. The Vracan Dominion was, in our own estimation, the apex of galactic evolution. We had conquered 12 systems in 4 centuries. Our military doctrine was studied across known space. Our warriors were bred for combat. Our strategists trained from hatching to exploit any weakness, any hesitation, any flaw in enemy reasoning. We had never lost a war. Not one. Then came the humans. These bizarre, soft-bodied bipeds from a planet they called Earth. A world our survey teams classified as extreme hazard, Category Alpha. Gravity that would rupture most species' circulatory systems. Atmospheric composition barely breathable by their own standards. An ecosystem where everything had evolved weapons.
Teeth. Claws.
Venom. Intelligence. The humans emerged from this evolutionary pressure cooker looking, by all accounts, like the least threatening species imaginable. No natural armor. No venom. No claws worth mentioning. No redundant organ systems. They broke if you hit them hard enough. They froze in cold environments. They overheated in warm ones. They required constant hydration and caloric input like biological machines running on the verge of catastrophic failure. They also smiled. Constantly. With all those teeth. Our first ambassador, a patient diplomat named Thesic, reported that they laughed at his jokes, asked genuine questions about our culture, and seemed genuinely interested in peaceful coexistence. They offered trade. They offered cultural exchange. They offered cooperation on scientific research. Weak, declared War Commander Vrox, slamming his primary claws against the council table.
Soft.
They're desperate for allies because they know they can't survive alone. One decisive strike and they'd fold like parchment. Vrox was our finest military mind. Undefeated in 37 campaigns. Decorated with more honor chips than his carapace could comfortably display. He could look at any tactical scenario and predict the outcome with 95% accuracy. He was also, as history would record, catastrophically, existentially, hilariously wrong about humanity. The crisis point came over a resource station in the Corvax Nebula. Both our species had claims to the region. Both had survey teams operating in overlapping space. Neither would back down. The Dominion Council, drunk on centuries of uninterrupted victory, voted unanimously to send a battle fleet. Vorlin, the ancient archivist, shuffled into the chamber uninvited. Security moved to intercept, but Council leader Thesic, the same diplomat who'd found the humans so charming, raised a hand. Speak quickly, historian. Vorlin looked around the room at all of us, his antennae trembling. Then he did something none of us expected.
He laughed.
Not a happy sound. The sound of someone watching you step toward an open hatch while distracted. You're going to attack the humans, he said. Not a question. Based on your simulations, your probability matrices, your centuries of flawless military logic. Vrox bristled. Our simulations show 98% probability of victory in any direct engagement. Their fleet is 1/8 our size. Their weapons are generations obsolete. Their vessels are slower, less armored, poorly coordinated. This is not war. This is harvest. Vorlin's antennae drooped further. Your simulations, he said slowly, are calibrated for species that understand acceptable losses, species that perform cost-benefit analysis, species that surrender when the price exceeds the prize. He paused, letting the silence stretch. Humans don't have that particular subroutine. More laughter. Even I chuckled, perched in my analyst alcove. Every species surrenders eventually. It's basic game theory. You fight until the cost outweighs the benefit. Then you negotiate. You retreat. You survive to fight another day. Warfare 101. Vorlon wasn't laughing. I have studied their history, he said quietly. Their conflicts. Their so-called world wars. Do you know what humans consider victory? Nobody answered. Whatever state exists when they finally decide to stop fighting. He let that sink in. Not when they've achieved their objectives. Not when the enemy is defeated. When they decide they're done. And sometimes, often, that decision takes generations. Vrox slammed the table again. Superstitious nonsense. They're one species. One primitive, fragile species playing at interstellar civilization. We are the Dominion. Vorlon looked at him with something like pity. Yes, he agreed. You are. The council voted unanimously to proceed. Vorlon left without another word. I watched him shuffle through the exit, and I swear, he paused at the threshold and looked directly at me. His antennae twitched once, a gesture I didn't understand at the time. Decades later, I realized it was apology. The assault on Korvax Nebula was textbook Dominion precision. 3 battle groups, coordinated jump insertion, overwhelming force projection. The human mining platforms offered token resistance before evacuation. We secured the station in 4 hours. 0 casualties. War Commander Vrox broadcast a victory message across all channels. The Korvax Nebula is now sovereign Dominion territory. Any human incursion will be met with immediate and decisive force. The humans didn't respond. Not with threats. Not with fleet movements. Not with anything we'd simulated. Instead, 3 days later, every Dominion bank across 12 systems experienced simultaneous, cascading transaction errors. Not theft. Nothing so crude. Our credits simply began migrating. Corporate accounts emptied into employee accounts. Military payroll redistributed itself to civilian pension funds. War chests dissolved into environmental restoration endowments. Economic chaos within 6 hours. While our financial regulators screamed into silent comms, someone, and we still don't know who, accessed every public address system on every Dominion world. Transportation hubs.
Government buildings.
Military bases.
Schools.
Then they started broadcasting human music.
Loud.
Ubiquitous. Impossible to override. A repetitive, aggressively cheerful song about something called a rickroll. It played for 8 consecutive hours. Vrox's carapace cycled through 3 shades of purple. Childish sabotage. Psychological warfare from a species incapable of real combat. This changes nothing. Except it did change things. Our citizens were confused. Our soldiers were humiliated. Our leadership looked powerless against pranks. And then came the glitter. Cargo drones, human-flagged, entered atmosphere over every major Dominion population center. They detonated at low altitude, releasing pressurized canisters of finely milled, static-charged, impossibly adhesive reflective particles. Within 20 minutes, every Vraken in every city sparkled under their respective suns. The particles infiltrated everything. Environmental systems. Military hardware. Personal effects. You couldn't attend a war council without light fracturing off your own carapace in rainbow spectra. Our mighty warriors, bred for intimidation, looked like festival decorations. Vrox demanded immediate retaliation. Send the 4th Fleet. Glass their colony at New Hope. Demonstrate what happens to species that mock the Dominion. Council leader Thesak hesitated. The humans have civilian population centers. Direct orbital bombardment violates galactic conventions. They've violated conventions first. Vrox's claws gouged the table. With glitter. With bad music. With financial sabotage that didn't even steal anything. Thesak's antennae sagged. That's exactly the problem. They're provoking us, drawing us toward disproportionate response. Every attack is calibrated to humiliate, not kill. What happens when we escalate to lethal force? What happens, Vrock snarled, is we remind them why predators don't mock apex hunters. The Fourth Fleet jumped to New Hope Colony. Population: 12 million. Defenses: minimal. Target: optimal. Except the humans had anticipated this. Not with warships. Their fleet remained stubbornly, infuriatingly positioned elsewhere. Instead, every civilian vessel in the system formed a defensive sphere around the planet. Cargo haulers, passenger transports, private yachts, even a vessel broadcasting registration as a floating retirement community. Admiral Corvex, commanding the Fourth Fleet, opened a channel. Evacuate or be destroyed. A human woman appeared on screen. She wore civilian coveralls and looked utterly unafraid. Yeah, she said cheerfully. That's gonna be a no. See, we figure you can shoot through us. We're just unarmed civilians in unarmored ships. But we've also made damn sure every sensor in human space is recording this. Every diplomatic channel is watching. So you go ahead. Make your point. Corvex held his fire. Not because he couldn't. Because he shouldn't. Rules of engagement. Civilian casualties. Galactic opinion. The Fourth Fleet sat frozen, locked in staring contest with 12 million human civilians who refused to move. And somewhere behind Dominion lines, 3 supply depots exploded simultaneously. That's when I began to understand what Vorlon tried to warn us about. The humans weren't fighting to win. They were fighting to prove we couldn't. The supply depot strikes were surgical. Not a single Dominion casualty, but 3 months of provisions gone in seconds. The Fourth Fleet, still immobilized at New Hope, couldn't resupply. Admiral Corvex faced an impossible choice: fire on civilians or withdraw in humiliation. He withdrew. Vrox's fury became legendary. He personally demanded the human ambassador's immediate expulsion. The problem? We didn't have a human ambassador. They'd offered one. We'd refused, too arrogant to establish diplomatic relations with a species we planned to conquer. Now we had no official channel through which to demand they stop humiliating us. Thesak convened Emergency Council. For the first time in Dominion history, the War Council looked genuinely uncertain. They're bleeding us, I said, surprising myself by speaking. Every eye turned to my analyst alcove. Not militarily. Politically. Economically. Psychologically. Every attack costs them almost nothing. Every response costs us more. Vrox rounded on me. Then we escalate. Hit their military infrastructure. Force them to commit their fleet. Win this through conventional engagement. And when we do, Thesak said quietly, what then? We've seen their unconventional capabilities. What makes you think their conventional ones are as weak as we assumed? Vorlon's words echoed in the chamber, unspoken but present. If you push them, they will redefine the game. We pushed. Of course we pushed. The Dominion didn't know how to do anything else. The next phase targeted human military outposts along the border. 3 simultaneous strikes, overwhelming force, no civilian presence to complicate engagement. Finally, conventional warfare. The humans responded by hacking our shipboard entertainment systems and replacing every video file with footage of Earth's most adorable predators. Baby animals, we later learned. Hundreds of hours of them. Our warriors, bred for generations to associate vulnerability with conquest, found themselves inexplicably reluctant to engage. Morale collapsed further. Soldiers who'd spent weeks scrubbing glitter from their environmental suits now discovered their personal media libraries contained only footage of small, fluffy creatures performing endearing activities. The psychological impact defied quantification. This is war. Vrox bellowed at the latest council session, his carapace actually cracking from stress.
War.
Not a comedy festival. Why are they treating us like a joke?
Because they could, I realized.
Because treating us like a joke cost them nothing and cost us everything. Because every prank, every humiliation, every glitter bomb and financial redistribution and rickroll broadcast was a message we refused to hear. You are not our equals. You are not our rivals. You are pests we are choosing not to exterminate. Thesak heard it. His antennae, once proud, now constantly drooped. We need to negotiate. We need to annihilate, Vrox countered. We need, Thesak said slowly, to understand what we're actually fighting. He assigned me to compile a comprehensive analysis of human military history, cultural psychology, and conflict resolution patterns. 3 weeks. Unlimited resources. Every intelligence asset redirected to answering one question. Who are these creatures, and how do we make them stop? What I found still haunts my sleep cycles. Humans had fought wars among themselves for their entire recorded history. Not border skirmishes. Not limited objective campaigns. Total wars. Genocidal conflicts. Wars that consumed generations, reshaped continents, redefined what civilization meant. They'd developed nuclear weapons and used them against population centers. They'd firebombed cities. They'd engineered famines. They'd committed atrocities against their own kind that made our worst military actions look restrained. And then this was the part that made no sense: they stopped. Not because they'd exterminated themselves. Not because some external force imposed peace. They simply decided, collectively, that war among themselves was unacceptable. They built institutions,
treaties,
alliances. They transformed their most destructive impulses into competition through commerce, athletics, artistic achievement. They didn't become pacifists. They became selective. They saved their savagery for existential threats. We had, I realized with growing horror, made ourselves existential threats. I presented my findings to the council. The silence that followed stretched so long I thought my audio receptors had failed. Vrox spoke first, his voice strangely quiet. You're saying they've been holding back? Yes, War Commander. All of this. The glitter. The music. The financial chaos. The baby animals. He couldn't quite bring himself to say it without visible confusion. That's them being restrained? The historical record suggests their default response to existential threat is total mobilization. Unrestricted warfare. Victory at any cost, including species-level sacrifice. I paused. They haven't done that to us. They're choosing not to. Why? I had no answer.
Not then.
Thesak found it first. Buried in intercepted civilian communications, in diplomatic backchannels we'd previously ignored, in the pattern of gifts and aid and medical assistance the humans had extended to former enemies throughout their history. They're giving us chances, he said. Every humiliation, every prank, every non-lethal strike, it's an off-ramp. They're showing us how humiliating defeat feels, so we don't have to experience how annihilation feels. Then we take the off-ramp, I said. Vrox said nothing. His claws, for once, remained still. Thesak opened a channel to human command. No demands. No threats. Just 3 words. We need to talk. The human response came within minutes. Not from Admiral Patterson. Their military commander was reportedly elsewhere. Instead, a civilian face appeared on our screens. Mid-40s, unremarkable features, calm eyes that held absolutely nothing resembling fear. Council Leader Thesak. I'm Marcus Webb, diplomatic liaison. You said you need to talk. Thesak's antennae twitched. You responded remarkably quickly. Webb smiled that human smile, all those teeth on display. We've been waiting for this call. Honestly, we expected it weeks ago. He paused. Months, actually. Right after the glitter incident, we figured someone in your government would realize what was happening. The implication hung in the air. You're slower than we anticipated. What is happening? Thesak asked quietly. From your perspective. Webb leaned back, considering. From our perspective? You picked a fight with a species that spent its entire evolutionary history being the underdog. Every predator on Earth was faster, stronger, better armed than our ancestors. We survived because we're clever, we're persistent, and we hold grudges across generations. He gestured vaguely. Also because we figured out that when you can't win a fair fight, you change what fair means. You've certainly done that, Vrox muttered, not quite under his breath. Webb's gaze shifted to the war commander. You think this is about Epsilon 7? The mining colony? The border dispute? He shook his head. That was the spark, not the fuel. The fuel is your assumption that military superiority equals victory. It doesn't. Never has. Victory belongs to whoever's willing to go further. Further how? I asked before I could stop myself. Webb looked at me directly. Further into the abyss. Further past the point where surrender makes sense. Further beyond what any reasonable species would consider acceptable losses. His expression softened. We don't like going there. It's dark and it's ugly and it leaves scars that never heal. But we've been there. We know the path. And when someone forces us onto it, we don't forget the way. Thessak's claws trembled against the console. You're saying we forced you onto that path. I'm saying you took the first step. We responded proportionally. Everything we've done, the glitter, the music, the financial disruptions, has been calibrated to avoid casualties. Yours or ours? Webb paused. That's not weakness. That's deliberate restraint. Every human commander in this conflict has standing orders. Humiliate, disrupt, demoralize. Do not kill unless there's no other choice. And if there's no other choice? Vrox challenged. Webb met his gaze steadily. Then the gloves come off. And we show you why our death world never managed to kill us off. The silence stretched. Thessak's breathing had become irregular, his carapace taking on a grayish pallor. What do you want? He finally asked. We want you to stop. Webb's voice carried no triumph, no satisfaction. Just exhaustion. We want you to withdraw from our territory. We want reparations sufficient to rebuild what you destroyed. We want public acknowledgement that you initiated unprovoked aggression against a peaceful species. And we want assurances, credible, verifiable assurances, that this never happens again. Unconditional surrender, Thessak whispered. We prefer to call it accepting responsibility. Webb's smile returned, but softer now. Semantics matter. How you frame this matters. We're not interested in humiliating you further. We're interested in ending this conflict before it becomes something none of us can walk away from. Vrox's claws finally moved, but not to strike. They curled inward, defensive. And if we refuse? If we continue the war? Webb's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. Became older, colder. Then we continue showing you why humanity survived its homeworld. He paused. Eventually, you'll run out of supply depots. Eventually, your economy will collapse under the weight of our asymmetric attacks. Eventually, your citizens will demand peace at any price. It might take years. It might take decades. But we'll still be here, still fighting, still refusing to quit. Another pause. The question is, will you? The transmission ended. Thessak dismissed the council. Everyone filed out slowly, silently. Vrox didn't speak, didn't slam anything, didn't rage. He simply walked away, his gait somehow diminished. I remained at my station, staring at the dark screen. We've been waiting for this call. They expected us to break weeks ago. Months. How long had they been ready to continue? How much further into the abyss were they prepared to go? And the question that truly terrified me, what happens when a species that refuses to quit meets a species that doesn't know how to surrender? I pulled up Vorland's file. His last known location, a remote monitoring station at the edge of Dominion space, observing human transmission patterns. He was still watching, still waiting, still right. I sent him a message.
Short.
Insecure. Desperate. What do we do now? His response came 6 hours later, just as the council reconvened to debate Webb's terms. You already know. You've always known. The question isn't whether to surrender. It's whether you're brave enough to admit you should. I looked at Thessak. At Vrox. At the War Council that had voted unanimously to attack, unanimously to escalate, unanimously to continue a conflict we couldn't win. Then I stood up. Council leader. War commander. My voice sounded strange. Even to me. I have a recommendation. Every eye turned toward my analyst alcove. We should accept their terms. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. The silence stretched. Then Vrox spoke, his voice strange. Not the usual thunder, but something quieter. More fragile. You're advising surrender. Yes, War Commander. We have never surrendered. Not once. Not in 4 centuries of warfare. I know. Vrox's claws tapped against the table.
Once. Twice.
A nervous tick I'd never seen in 30 years of service. Explain yourself. I pulled up my analysis, the data I'd compiled on human conflict resolution. The humans aren't asking us to kneel. They're asking us to acknowledge reality. We cannot win this war. Every simulation I've run, conventional, unconventional, asymmetrical, total mobilization, every single one ends in Dominion defeat. Not because our military is inferior, because our psychology is incompatible with total war. Thesak leaned forward. Incompatible how? We calculate acceptable losses. We perform cost-benefit analysis. We surrender when the price exceeds the prize. I paused. The humans don't. Their historical record shows they've continued fighting when defeat was certain, when victory was impossible, when survival itself was questionable. They fought because continuing to fight was preferable to accepting defeat. That's not strategy. That's pathology. And you're saying we should what? Thank them for defeating us. Vrox's voice carried bewilderment now, not anger. I'm saying we should examine what happens after humans defeat enemies. I pulled up another file. The Kaldreth Imperium attacked humanity, lost comprehensively, accepted terms. 3 years later, they received medical aid, technology transfers, trade agreements. 20 years later, they're human allies. Their economy is stronger. Their military is more capable. Their citizens enjoy higher living standards than before the war. I paused. The humans don't just defeat enemies. They convert them. Thesak's antennae slowly rose. You believe they intend the same for us. I believe their entire conflict strategy suggests it. Every non-lethal strike. Every humiliation designed to demonstrate capability without inflicting casualties. Every off-ramp Webb mentioned. I met Thesak's gaze. They didn't want to fight us. They don't want to destroy us. They want to teach us. Teach us what? Vrox demanded. That strength isn't the ability to destroy. It's the ability to choose not to destroy and still win. I paused. Vorlon understood. He tried to warn us. The humans aren't dangerous because they can defeat us. They're dangerous because they can defeat us and then convince us to be grateful for it. Another silence. Longer this time. Thesak's voice, when he finally spoke, carried the weight of 4 centuries of Dominion history. What do you recommend, analyst? 3 things. First, accept Webb's terms immediately. Every day we delay costs us more systems, more reparations, more credibility. Second, establish formal diplomatic relations. Request their aid programs. Accept their technology transfers. Become the students they're offering to teach. I paused. Third, find Vorlon. Bring him back. Make him our ambassador to humanity. Vrox's claws stopped tapping. The archivist who predicted our defeat. The prophet who understood humans before any of us. He warned us. We didn't listen. I met Vrox's gaze directly. We should demonstrate that we've learned to listen. The war commander said nothing. His carapace, once vibrant with aggression, seemed dull. Diminished. Thesak made his decision. Open a channel to Marcus Webb. Inform him we accept his terms. All of them. He paused. Then locate Vorlon. Offer him whatever resources he requires to return. Tell him the Dominion finally needs his wisdom. The transmission to Webb lasted 11 minutes. He didn't gloat, didn't mock. Simply nodded, confirmed logistics, and promised human technical teams would arrive within the week to assist with the withdrawal from disputed systems. One more thing, Thesak added. We have an elder. A historian. He tried to warn us about this outcome. We didn't listen. He paused. I'd like him to serve as our primary diplomatic liaison. Webb's expression shifted. Not surprise, but something like recognition. Vorlon. The archivist who requested access to our historical archives 30 years ago. Thesac's antennae snapped upright. You know of him? We know everyone who takes our history seriously. Webb's smile held no mockery. Vorlon asked good questions. He was the only one of your species who seemed genuinely interested in understanding us, not just cataloging weaknesses. He paused. We'd be honored to work with him. The transmission ended. The War Council sat in stunned silence. We had lost. Completely, comprehensively, irrevocably. And somehow, impossibly, we had also won. Vorlon returned 12 days later. His carapace was no less dull, his antennae no less drooping, but his eyes held something I'd never seen there before. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Relief. You finally listened, he said to Thesac. We finally had to. Thesac's voice carried centuries of exhaustion. The alternative was extinction.
No.
Vorlon shook his head slowly. The alternative was irrelevance. Becoming another cautionary tale in human historical archives. Another species that refused to learn until learning cost everything. He paused. Extinction would have been merciful compared to that. I approached him after the council dismissed. He looked at me with those ancient, knowing eyes. You send the message, he said. The one asking what we should do. Yes. You already knew the answer. You just needed confirmation. His antennae twitched. That's wisdom. Rare in the young. I don't feel wise, I admitted. I feel like I spent 30 years being wrong about everything that matters. Vorlon made a sound. Not quite laughter, but close.
Good.
That's the first step toward being right. He paused. The humans have a saying. It takes a wise being to recognize wisdom in another species. I spent decades studying them, trying to understand how they transformed enemies into allies, conquerors into partners. His voice dropped. They don't have a secret. No hidden technology, no psychological manipulation, no cultural virus. They just persist. In war, in peace, in friendship. They outlast everyone else's hatred until there's nothing left but relationship. That's terrifying, I said. That's humanity. Vorlon's antennae lifted slightly. And now they're ours.
I didn't understand then.
Not fully. 3 years later, Dominion engineers worked alongside human technicians to construct the first joint research station in the Corvax Nebula, the very territory we'd gone to war over. Vrox, retired and unexpectedly serene, served as military advisor to the project. Thesac's health was failing, but he maintained regular correspondence with Marcus Webb, who had become something like a friend. And I taught. Tactics and strategy, yes, but also history. Vorlon's history. Human history. The long, improbable story of a species from a death world that learned to make peace the same way they learned to make war. Relentlessly, creatively, without ever quite quitting. My first lecture each semester ends with the same words, the lesson Vorlon tried to teach us all those years ago. If you push humans, they will redefine the game. But if you stop pushing, if you choose wisdom over pride, peace over conquest, they'll redefine that too. They'll redefine enemies into friends, defeat into alliance, war into something neither of us recognized when we started. I paused, looking at my cadets. The question isn't whether humans can destroy you. It's whether you're brave enough to let them save you instead. Vorlon's message remains on my desk, fading now, but still legible. You understand now?
Good.
Make sure they remember. I will. For as long as I teach, for as long as the Dominion exists, for as long as the galaxy remembers what happens when pride meets persistence. We struck first. We lost. But because the humans chose mercy, we also survived. That's not a defeat. That's a second chance. And I intend to use it. 30 years after the war, I returned to Corvax Nebula. The Joint Research Station had grown into a city, a gleaming monument to cooperation that neither species could have built alone. Humans and Vraken worked side by side in laboratories, cargo bays, botanical gardens. Children, both species had children here, played in zero-gravity recreational chambers, their laughter translating imperfectly across translation protocols, but meaning the same thing in any language. I walked the corridors slowly, my elderly carapace protesting each step. A young human technician smiled at me with all those teeth, and I smiled back. We'd learned to smile, over the decades. It no longer felt like baring fangs. Vorlin's memorial stood at the station's heart. He'd died peacefully 7 years after the war, surrounded by human and Vrakan scholars who'd come to study under his wisdom. The monument was simple, a polished obsidian slab engraved with his final words, recorded during his last lecture. Understanding is not surrender. Peace is not weakness. And the species that learns from its enemies becomes stronger than the species that only defeats them. I placed my claws against the cool stone.
His antennae had drooped.
Mine did now, too. Old friend, I whispered. You would not believe what we've become. A shadow fell across the memorial. I turned to find Admiral Patterson. No, not Admiral anymore. Ambassador Patterson. Her hair was gray now, her face lined with decades, but her eyes held the same steady calm I remembered from that first transmission. Thraxic, she said. I heard you were visiting. Ambassador. I inclined my head. You look well. I look old. She smiled. We both do. But we earned it. We walked together through the station, two veterans of a war that had ended before most of these young scientists were born. She told me about her grandchildren, 3 of whom were studying Vrakan culture at Dominion universities. I told her about my cadets, generations of officers who'd never fired a shot in anger, who understood that strength meant knowing when not to fight. Vorlin would have loved this, she said, gesturing at the bustling concourse. His vision. Peace through understanding. He'd have lectured everyone for 3 hours about the historical precedents, I said. And they'd have listened. He had that gift. Patterson laughed.
He did.
Impossible old prophet. She paused. You know, we never forgot him. When your council first requested diplomatic relations, we already had a file on Vorlin. We'd been tracking his research for decades. He was the reason we waited so long to respond aggressively. I stopped walking.
What?
He sent us messages. Before the war. During the war. After. Patterson's expression softened. He told us your species wasn't evil, wasn't irredeemable. Just arrogant. Just blind. Just in need of a lesson that didn't destroy you. She met my gaze. We calibrated everything, the glitter, the music, the financial disruptions, the civilian blockade, based on his assessments. He told us what you could endure without breaking. What would humiliate without traumatizing. What would teach without destroying. I couldn't speak. My carapace felt suddenly, impossibly tight. Vorlin was your prophet, Patterson said quietly. But he was also our guide. We couldn't have won the peace without him. Couldn't have known how to turn enemies into allies.
She paused.
He spent the last years of his life translating us to each other, making sure the lesson took. Why didn't you tell us? He asked us not to. Said you needed to learn humility on your own. That being indebted to a prophet was one thing. Being indebted to the species you'd attacked was another. She smiled sadly. He was protecting your pride, even after everything. We stood in silence, watching children play. Vrakan and human, running and tumbling and shrieking with joy, their species indistinguishable in the zero-gravity haze. Vorlin once told me, I said slowly, that humans didn't have a secret. No hidden technology, no psychological manipulation, no cultural virus. Just persistence. I paused. He was wrong. Patterson raised an eyebrow. Your secret isn't persistence, I said. It's hope. You fight because you hope to win. You offer peace because you hope it'll be accepted. You help former enemies because you hope they'll become friends. I looked at her. You hope, and you keep hoping, even when every rational calculation says hope is absurd.
She was quiet for a long time.
Maybe, she finally said. Or maybe we're just too stubborn to give up on the galaxy. Same thing, really. I laughed. It sounded strange. I'd learned to laugh late in life, but I'd learned well. Ambassador. I said, I have a proposal. Oh. The Dominion is establishing a new academic institute. Interdisciplinary studies in conflict resolution, diplomatic history, Xenocultural psychology. I paused. We want to name it the Vorlon Center for Interspecies Understanding. Patterson's weathered face shifted into something I'd never seen from her before. Not the cold calm of wartime. Not the measured diplomacy of peacetime.
Tears.
Actual tears, running down her human face. He'd have hated that, she said. Too much attention. Too formal. He'd have secretly loved every moment of it, I countered. She laughed, wiping her eyes.
Yeah.
He really would have. We'd like human participation, faculty exchanges, joint research programs, shared curriculum development. I paused. Vorlon spent his life trying to understand your species. It seems fitting that his legacy should continue that work. Patterson extended her hand. I'd learned this gesture decades ago. I took it carefully, my claws gentle around her weathered fingers. The Vorlon Center, she said. Humanity would be honored. The station's external viewport showed the nebula itself, swirling with impossible colors, the same nebula we'd gone to war over. Now it belonged to no one and everyone. Now it was a symbol, not of conflict, but of what conflict could become when both sides chose wisdom over pride. I thought about Keshen, the old Kaldreth prophet who'd tried to warn his people. About Vorlon, who'd guided us through darkness we didn't recognize until we were already inside it. About the cadets in my classroom, learning lessons their ancestors would have rejected as weakness. I thought about the glitter, still occasionally discovered in forgotten ventilation shafts, catching light and throwing rainbows across Dominion military installations. About the music, now a nostalgic meme rather than psychological warfare. About the baby animals, whose descendants filled Vraken homes as beloved companions. We had struck first. We had lost. But because the humans chose mercy, because Vorlon showed them how, we had also survived. We had grown. We had become something neither species could have become alone. That evening, I transmitted one final message to Vorlon's old communication channel. I knew no one would receive it. He'd been gone for decades. But it felt necessary. Old friend, we named the center after you.
Hope that's all right.
Your warnings saved us. Your wisdom guided them. Your hope, your stubborn, irrational, absolutely human hope, built everything you see here. We remember. We teach. We learn. Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for teaching them not to give up on us either. Thank you for everything. I closed the transmission. Outside the viewport, the Korvax nebula swirled in eternal, beautiful chaos. And somewhere, I imagined, an ancient archivist with drooping antennae read my message and smiled. The galaxy had learned. Finally.
Completely.
And humanity, against all odds, had won the only victory that ever truly mattered. They had won the peace.
The end.